Hankster here, and welcome to another retro review. And this is a special retro review, being that this past weekend was the release of the heavily anticipated Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. If you remember back in just 2012, I kind of started a little bit of a series of movie reviews involving Superman and Batman. Of course, at the time, I didn't know there was going to be a crossover movie. It was just, I just wanted to kind of go through, because most around the time that it was 2012, and Dark Knight Rises was coming out in theaters and all, which I was planning to go see, and well, of course, for unforeseen reasons, I wasn't able to. But going to finish up my little reviews on the Batman and Superman movies. They're now out on DVD and Blu-ray. And we're going to start off here. Of course, I did most of the wide theatrical release movies of Superman, from the original 4 movies starring Christopher Reeve, the Brandon Routh movie. Of course, speaking of Brandon Routh, you can still catch him every week on Legends of Tomorrow as Captain Atom, and of course the more recent Man of Steel, starring Henry Cavill, who of course now reprising his role as Superman in Batman vs. Superman. But now we're going to go into an interesting DVD release. This case came out around 2006, and this is because none other than the director's cut version of Superman 2. Director in question, of course, is Richard Donner. As I said, this came out in 2006, around the same time Superman Returns came out, starring Brandon Routh. And basically, if you remember, Superman Returns was pretty much Bryan Singer's homage to Richard Donner. Being that Richard Donner did great work with the original Superman and all, Bryan Singer tried to continue things. Basically, if you really pay attention, Superman Returns basically does not include the events of Superman's 3 and 4. It basically kind of takes like 5 years after the events of Superman 2. So I guess after somewhere between the Superman 1 and 2, there was kind of a break in the universes. So one universe went to Richard Donner, the other one went to his replacement, Richard Lester. The Richard Lester movies, of course, went into theaters after, of course, around Superman 2. Richard Lester went on to do the other movies and all, and we all know what happened at that. Richard Donner, of course, was the original director for the first 2 Superman movies. Yes, he was hired to do Superman 1 and 2. And they were planning to release both movies simultaneously. Well, not release both movies, but to produce both movies simultaneously, back to back, and then probably release them sometime apart from each other. But because of the budget, they were only able to get one movie done, which obviously was Superman 1. They put Superman 2 on the back burner and finished up number 1 and released that in theaters. And obviously it became a hit, and they, of course, always had the money to finish up Superman 2. But because of the growing conflicts between Richard Donner and the Salkinds, if you don't remember who the Salkinds are, or don't know who they are were a father and son production team from Hungary who produced numerous movies in the past, and of course they got their hands on the rights to do the Superman movies, so they decided to get Richard Donner in the first place to do it because of his work with the Element. And I think about that, Superman versus the Antichrist would be interesting. But because of conflicts and differences of opinions on how to do the movies and all, Richard Donner was fired right at the beginning of their finishing up the production of Superman 2. And they got another director named Richard Lester to finish up 2. That's why there's so many differences between the actual theatrical release and this version I'm going to talk about right here. Now, of course, the obvious difference is for example, if you ever saw the Richard Lester version, which of course is the wide release version, which is shown on television and all, it starts off with Superman stopping a terrorist attack, oddly enough, ironically enough, in France. This time, of course, it's French terrorists taking a nuclear bomb and putting it into an elevator in the Eiffel Tower. Of course, Lois Lane gets herself involved in that. Superman saves her, takes the bomb, and throws it into space, and when it explodes, that is how the Kryptonian supervillains escape the Phantom Zone. Now, in the Richard Donner storyline, they did not have that. I don't know why they did that, being they went with what happened in Superman 1. If you remember Superman 1, there were 2 missiles hijacked by Lex Luthor. One went to California to activate the San Andreas Fault, and the other one was sent to Hackensack, New Jersey, basically just to, get Superman confused and try to chasing one, the other one would just go off because even though he's super fast, he couldn't stop 2 missiles. Obviously, because of the kryptonite as well being used, it wastes more time. But of course, Miss Teschmacher saves Superman, makes him promise to save her mom and Hackensack first. So he goes off after that missile. He takes the missile, he re-aims it into space, and it flies off into space. Now, of course, he has to deal with California. While that's going on, the missile goes off into space, and then it explodes. And that is what starts off the destruction of the Phantom Zone, which, of course, Zod, Ursa, and Non are trapped in. Of course, they escape. Speaking of the name Non, you might recognize the name if you are a watcher of Supergirl, the Supergirl television series. Now, Non, in that series, he, of course, is the husband of Supergirl's evil aunt, who is, of course, the twin of her mother. But Non, in that one, he's, of course, the I don't know if he's the second in command or whatever, or the main guy. I don't know which is which, but he, of course, is currently the new leader of these group of Kryptonians who want to take over the Earth and all. And, of course, in the Superman movie series, Non is, of course, this big hulking Kryptonian who can't talk. He's mute, and he's pretty much Zod's muscle. So it's interesting too that the name has gone on to doing other projects outside just doing Superman movies. And of course, it's the 3 Kryptonian villains. Everybody, it's the same cast. It's just situations are kind of done differently in both movies. But of course, Zod and his cronies, of course, wreak havoc with the joint venture on the moon, just like in the Richard Lester version. They do land on Earth. They discover their powers more. The minor change when they meet up with the sheriff and his deputy and in the little town, as they took out the part where they go into the bar and start wreaking havoc there. So you just go straight from Zod and going up against the sheriff and his deputy to straight into the news crew being there and the military taking them on. Now, meanwhile, they kind of expanded things on Lois trying to prove that Clark is Superman. So obviously, where she tries to fall out of the Daily Planet building, and Clark using his powers secretly to prevent her from getting killed, which is kind of mentioned in the Richard Lester version. That scene, even though they did feel they didn't put it in the Richard Lester version, they just have it mentioned as like a little instance of one of Lois's little Superman tests on Clark. Um, One interesting to note, if you see this particular version, there's a scene where the major difference here. Now, if you've seen the Richard Lester version, um, Lois, after Lois tries to prove that he's Superman again by trying to go down the Niagara Falls again, try to be rescued there, and of course they're driving themselves in their honeymoon suite. Clark, of course, tries to get his hair brushed for her. He trips over a stuffed bear. He loses his glasses into the fire. He dubs his hand in there to get his glasses. She, of course, realizes he's Superman because he hasn't got burned, and that's pretty much how it is. Now, in this version, Lois decides to pull a gun on him to be a little bit more direct, and she basically says, well, I'm not going to risk my life this time. I'm going to risk your life. And she, of course, shoots him, and of course he reveals himself to her. Of course, he says, Lois, if you were wrong, then you would have killed Clark. And she said, well, with what? With blanks? And basically that particular scene was taken out of a series of audition tapes. That particular scene was put in to do originally was used for when the actresses for Lois Lane were being auditioned. That's what that particular scene was used, and they used the scenes between Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder to do that particular scene, and it kind of fit in a little bit. So that was the major difference between that and the Richard Lester version. Of course, they changed a little bit, obviously, for the part where, of course, they head to the Fortress of Solitude, and Superman decides to give up his superpowers and all. Now, the major difference is between there. Now, the Richard Lester version, they took out all references to Jor-El. Actually, I've mentioned his name, and they took the scenes that originally were for Marlon Brando, who of course played Jor-El, and they put in another actor, and they also used Susanna York, who of course played Superman's mother, Laura, in the movie to kind of represent the couple, even though oddly enough, I don't know why they didn't use the Marlon Brando footage. Here, they were able to find all the material that Marlon Brando had done for Superman 2, and not only for this particular scene, but also for the scene where Lex Luthor, after he escapes from jail with Miss Teschmacher, they of course head to the fortress and they find out most of Superman's secrets, well, of course, except for his secret identity, oddly enough, and they added in the Marlon Brando footage for that scene as well. And so there was this really haunting scene right where Superman's losing his powers. Now, of course, there's also a difference there. In the Richard Lester version, he goes into something like a container, a coffin-looking device standing up, and it seals him up, and he gets exposed to the red sunlight that way. In the Richard Donner version, he just walks into like a cave chamber, and that's how it happens from there. Well, while that's going on, Marlon Brando, while witnessing this, he looks up at Lois, who's watching all this, and she's wearing a Superman's outfit, probably. And so they just had sex. That's another obvious difference here. In the Richard Lester version, she and Clark had sex after he loses his powers. In the Richard Donner version, Lois and Clark has sex before he loses his powers. So that could kind of explain a lot of things that happened in Superman Returns. Now, of course, if you remember, in Superman Returns, we find out that she, of course, had a kid, and by the end of the movie, we realized that the kid is really Superman's because he has latent superpowers. So, ironically enough, this is probably the difference between when they had sex kind of played into how they did Superman Returns when involving this kid. Now, as I was saying, Jor-El looks up, and he looks at this. He just looks this, and gives her this look. This right. He just stares right through, into her eyes, and it's kind of creepy. He's like, you say it's your fault, that this happened. Of course, happened. They did have a lengthier version of the Kryptonian villains attacking the White House, and there's an interesting change. Now, in the Richard Lester version, of course, they deface the Mount Rushmore. In this version, they use their powers to destroy or tear apart the Washington Monument. And of course, it gets fixed later on, but so there's no difference there. The first, as I said, extended the scene where they invade the White House. Even it was a scene where Zod gets his hands on a machine gun and gleefully starts shooting people, which is pretty interesting. Here's a guy who bullets don't hurt, but he said, "Oh, I'll use this on everybody else," and he had a good time with it. And all. Of course, obviously, another extended scene was when Clark realizes he has to get his powers back. In the Richard Lester version, he returns to the fortress. He finds that the green crystal, which basically what it was is that they explain in the Richard Lester version, when he's talking with Lois, he takes it out, he shows it to her, and he gives it to her to look at, and basically they forget to put it back in the console. In the Donner version, the crystal somehow survives the explosion of the console, and Clark finds it and uses it to summon Jor-El one more time. And of course, Jor-El is the reason how he uses the remaining part of his energy to reactivate Superman's powers. So it's basically a sacrifice there. In the Richard Lester version, you really don't see how, Superman gets his powers back. He gets the green crystal. Okay, that's going to give him his powers. We all left it at that. Of course, there's obviously a little bit of differences with the battle scene in Metropolis. Superman, of course, crashes into the torch of the Statue of Liberty. There's differences here and there. Here, you just got to pick it up from the movie. And the final difference, well, not the final difference here, but the climactic difference, when Superman leads the Kryptonian villains to the Fortress of Solitude. There's not much of an actual physical conflict there. It's a lot of talking in the Richard Donner version, and of course then he goes back into the chamber. He tricks them into thinking he's lost his powers, and of course they lose their powers, and of course he defeats them that way. And all. Now, of course, the final difference was that how Superman, tries to make it so that Lois won't give away his identity. Now, of course, in the Richard Lester version, the actual theatrical release, he kisses her and it causes her to forget. Now, of course, the timeline keeps going, and everybody remembers the Kryptonian villains and everything else. Now, in the Richard Donner version, now, much like what happened the events happened in Superman 1, where Superman flies around the Earth and spins it backwards and everything to redo the timeline so that Lois doesn't get killed, he does the same at the end of Superman 2. He goes back in time and, of course, goes as far as to prevent the Kryptonian villains from escaping the Phantom Zone. So Lois doesn't even know that their time together. Everything's fit. Pretty much. No Kryptonian villains, nothing. So pretty much, they say, well, okay, then how can it fit Superman Returns. Well, I don't know, because there was a little part in there where Lois kind of picks up on something. She kind of picks up that something had happened, but she just can't remember what it is. So maybe somehow, we don't know. And of course, there's a cute little part, and if you remember the Richard Lester version, Lois sends Clark out to get a hamburger, and he of course winds up to go beat up on the bully that beat him up in the movie. In the Richard Donner version, she asks him to go get a pizza. So that's a cute little differences there as well. Take it as you will. Each movie kind of has each version kind of has its good parts and bad parts. I like the Donner version, and I also like the Richard Lester version. As I said, both movies kind of now branched off. The Superman, even we try to call it the Christopher Reeve Superman universe, or the Salkind Superman universe, into two timelines now. One that the first one was Richard Lester, of course, the theatrical releases, which include 2 with 3 and 4. Which includes Superman meeting up with Richard Pryor and everything, and then of course you have the Donner version, which of course would branch off into Superman Returns. And of course, obviously that Superman Returns has no connection to Superman's 3 and 4. But it's interesting to see what would have happened if Donner was not fired. Obviously. Be it some of it was just, footage used for other purposes and all that. The special effects added to it. They're trying their best to try to make it like special effects that were around at that time, as opposed to trying to use CGI, modern day CGI and everything and all. But it's interesting part of your collection just to know what Richard Donner had in mind for his version of Superman 2, and what could have been and all. I suggest you go pick it up. There is some other, oddly enough, more deleted scenes that weren't even in but I've seen them on different television airings. Like, the Kryptonian villains had to go through a force field to get into the Fortress of Solitude and such. But I hope you enjoyed this little review of the Superman 2 director's cut version of this movie, featuring, of course, the Richard Donner clips and work. He did a great job. I do like this version as much as I like the actual theatrical release. And of course, my next retro video will be for Dark Knight Rises. Of course, the final of the Chris Nolan Batman movies. That we'll finally do a review on in our next movie review, before we do, of course, a review on Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. And of course, speaking of that movie, we'll be doing little collectible reviews on that as well, and such. So I hope you enjoyed this review, and stay tuned here for more reviews and whatnot here on the Multiverse. See ya.